So there was a good article just came out on Spotify, and I'm going to dig into it here just real quick as we wrap this part up. Because Spotify has adopted a lot of these kind of ideas too. They're not calling it lean. But so what's interesting is my good friend Rochelle, who was the head of design for Netflix, like I mentioned earlier, is now the head of UX for Spotify. So I'm going to have a chat with her. I just sent her a LinkedIn conversation about it. But this is what they've done. They're actually running like lean startups, and they do call it that. They have this idea of squads. Overall squads running like lean startups. Do you have the right picture there? Looks like I have the wrong picture here. Let's go to squad here. Yeah. So squads are these little small. They're almost like scrum teams, but they feel more like a startup team. That's exactly what we did. Multidisciplinary, little group, right? Long-term mission is build and improve the products to stay long-term on the product. There's your dedicated team concept, right? Apply lean startup principles like MVP. They use the phrase think it, build it, ship it, tweak it. Just build, test, learn, right? Emphasis on great workspaces. They all come together as a squad. They walk through the stories. It's product design, engineering all together. Exactly what we're doing. They got cooler names though. I wish I'd come up with these names. You could write a book with these kind of names. This is really sweet. They got squad, right? Then they have tribes, and tribes are collections of squads that work in a related area, a related, functioning of product areas, right? And they kind of become incubators for tribes, incubators, for, I should say squads there, I'm sorry. Tribes become incubators for squads because, as a squad team kind of starts up, it's the same problem I've seen is that when you put a team together kind of lean like this, how do they operate? But if you have other teams that are in the same area or domain that are working like this, they can learn from each other. So they become a good, kind of thing like that. And then they have regular gatherings. So like in our area, if for example, at PayPal, we have a group called the business group, the kind of merchant group. And there we have like the PayPal Here product, for merchants to do the swiping and the phone thing like Square. We have like the merchant experience and merchant onboarding, sign up, acquisition of merchants. We have a bunch of different products. So each one of those would be a tribe in this kind of terminology, and that you'd have a tribe actually for that whole area, and each of those would be squads, in the individual areas. And then they have this concept of chapters and guilds. And this is really where you get into something like the front-end engineering practice. They don't have them report to a centralized person, but all the front-end engineers, they're actually in a chapter or a guild. And the only difference between a chapter and a guild is a chapter just goes across a tribe, and a guild goes across the whole organization. So you may have a smaller group of front engineers that are sort of in this, this chapter within a tribe that goes across squads. From each squad you may have front-end engineers. They're kind of collected together in a chapter, and they get together to share best practices in their area. And then the guild itself, shares best practices across all that. I think it's pretty fascinating. I like the terminology. I think the terminology is good because it sort of makes it stick in your head. And I think it's fun to see a different way to explain what we've been doing ourselves, within PayPal, sort of just learning on the fly. And you can find some more information here. But that's what I had for this morning on Lean UX. So let's take a few minutes till lunch gets here, and let's talk about what your thoughts are on this. Does Lean UX kind of make sense? What questions do you have? Yeah.
Saying the acumen is very, very, very familiar to doing, and maybe my experience was a little bit different.
Yeah.
But this is very much of doing research in graduate school.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was going to be. I had this idea. Let's see if this works. And you get out there, and you're like, well, that didn't quite work. So you take information from the one iteration, you get to the next, and you just keep iterating and going and learning. And the other thing I wanted to emphasize when you're saying, getting in stuff in front of people and actually testing it.
Yeah.
It's one thing when you're up there saying it, and I don't know all your background, but I'm going to say it is an extremely humbling experience.
It is.
When you have this, I've got this great interaction. You get in front of a user and you just see them struggle. I mean, I had a checkbox that came on the screen, and I thought it was the most intuitive thing in the world. There's a checkbox you check it if you want this thing. And it was my significant other who could not for the life of her see that it was a checkbox to click on. And that just completely changed my, not my confidence, but it had changed my own perspective on how well I knew doing UX myself. Because another thing I remember very clearly is, engineers are not designers.
Right.
We can actually, we can facilitate stuff, but to actually get it, to make sure that it's working, you've got to get it in front of people. And you kind of do need to have that experience of, kind of falling on your face to really appreciate.
And with your product, right?
Yes.
I mean, because it's all very contextual. Every company has different, there's all different kinds of context with your product and with the people you have, the consumers you have, everything else. You watch consumers, you kind of forget this, especially if you're in the consumer science, consumer world, like, Best Buy or whatever, where you just got every kind of person, right? Humans are pretty weird. We behave, like flocks, and we behave in very strange ways, and we're subtly manipulated, and we don't read. And, we had this lady come in who, you're at PayPal, you're doing a usability study for PayPal, and you've got this site that's showing there, and it's got the Buy It with PayPal button, and she's doing everything but hit the Buy It with PayPal button. She keeps going around with her mouse going, well, I don't usually use PayPal, which of course she doesn't because we got somebody who's not a PayPal member. So it's like, well, I'm thinking, take a leap with me, woman. It's like, it's like you're at PayPal, you're at a usability test, they probably want you to click the damn button, you know what I mean? And literally like almost 5 minutes went by where she agonized over this scenario. Usually, lady who leads it, she's extremely patient, and she said, well, what are you thinking, all the kind of right questions where you don't ever lead them, And finally at some point she says, well, you know what, let's click that button and see what happens, And so we finally got it passed. She would never click that button. That's the kind of people you're dealing with. So there's no way you can kind of predict their behavior totally. I mean, we all have good design principles and patterns and things like that, and I'm a big believer in those that can get us in the ballpark, but how to assemble those in the right way for our particular consumers. For Netflix, for example, having come from the desktop world where I was building full like wargaming tools and, integrated development environments and, games or whatever else, right? People invest themselves into those and they'll learn more of the arcane stuff in it, or you train people or whatever. But now to have something where somebody it's basically like a drive-through, and they've got to be able to like grok your experience in a drive-through, and was a totally different world for me at Yahoo and Netflix and everything else. And the thing I began to realize, like Stephen Krug's book, Don't Make Me Think, is so true. It's a very good book. If you haven't read it, it's a really good book. He also has another one, Rocket Surgery. Yeah. He's a great guy, by the way. Real funny guy. But in that one, Don't Make Me Think, what I started realizing at Netflix is really don't make me work, especially for media consumption. And we actually found out through a lot of our testing was all those great tools we wanted to put out there for movie discovery, and we had a lot of great ideas and some really cool stuff. None of them worked. Now they're still continuing to try because nobody really wanted to work for finding movies, right? They say they do in a usability study, but when it comes down to actually what people do and say are two different things. So if you put something in there that required a little bit extra work to find something, and let's say you would find something that's going to be really, really good and you could guarantee they're going to be happy with, versus putting something out maybe even mediocre that they'll try and like enough, that's actually better. And it sounds really terrible, I realize that. But that's kind of what happened. It's like it's better to give a recommendation. So if you look at the experience, what Netflix came out with on the PS3, the very first, all those were HTML5 experiences. Very first TV experience we came out, or console experience we came out with like that, we had two very different ones. One had a genre navigation where you could search and you could pick your areas and stuff like that and see your movies over here in a grid and your the menu system in that navigated back and forth, and we had to do some very fancy stuff with graphic compositing, within the WebKit browser, and we wrote a bunch of extra graphic algorithms for that, and all kinds of cool stuff. And the other was just showed a grid. Here's what you like. Here's what you like. Here's what you like. It's recently watched, or you like this because of whatever. Just a stupid grid. And that one did much better as far as people picking movies, watching movies, staying as members. The other one, people canceled more. And the reason why is because if you spend more of your time twiddling the bits around, trying to find something, and don't actually watch something, at some point you go, why am I even bothering with this? It's too hard, right? And that's in the aggregate. Yes, sir.
Just remembering the design of everyday things when they're talking about
Yeah.
it probably won an award. It's like, it looks great, but you can't actually use the clock radio or the door.
That's exactly right.
So,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
something to be very, very mindful of in doing design work.
Yeah, and I never would have guessed those sort of things. In hindsight, you can talk about like, oh, yeah, that makes sense or whatever. But I never would have guessed that without having seeing it and seeing the data to bring it about. So, yeah, consumer science is odd.